The Galactic Coalition's Interstellar Training Academy, known informally as the Crucible, hovered in high orbit over a gas giant that never saw day. Inside its vast steel labyrinth, cadets from over 50 member species drilled, studied, and clashed. Among them, a small group of humans, newest entrants to the coalition, stood out less for their numbers and more for the suspicion they attracted. Eli Rourke had grown used to the sideways glances. At first, he'd chalked it up to curiosity, maybe even resentment. Humanity had stumbled onto faster-than-light travel barely 2 decades ago, and yet here they were, being molded for joint command with races that had traversed stars for millennia. Still, today's stares were different. Narrower, sharper, like blades drawn halfway from their sheaths. The morning simulation had gone off script. Their squad was meant to defuse a hypothetical hostage situation on a derelict freighter. The program was designed to favor Noxari chain-of-command strategies, slow, methodical, hierarchical. Eli had bypassed 2 entire levels of protocol by using the air vents to reach the core room, stun the captors with an improvised electromagnetic burst, and evacuate the hostages before the main unit even breached the door. It had worked. Too well. "You endangered your team," barked General Vergax, his voice a low, gravel-like hiss that echoed across the assembly bay. The general towered nearly 8 feet, his glistening, obsidian-scaled arms folded behind his back. His 4 eyes, too small and too dominant, bore into Eli with a disdain usually reserved for pests. Eli didn't flinch. "The objective was met, sir. 0 casualties, successful extraction. And disregard for protocol. For structure." The general stepped forward, heavy footfalls rattling the alloy beneath them. "Structure holds empires. Improvisation tears them apart." Around them, cadets lined up in silence. Dozens of species, tentacled, furred, feathered, silicon-based, all focused on the solitary human who dared to speak when silence was expected. Eli could feel his squad behind him. No one moved. Some were Noxari themselves, others from allied species, all trained to show absolute submission in the general's presence. Eli had spent months studying their culture, their expectations, their unspoken rules. He also knew when they were bluffing strength. "I acted within the Operational Flexibility Clause, subsection 5, he said quietly, though his voice didn't waver. "It was a simulation. I adapted." Vergax's nostrils flared. For a moment, Eli thought the general might simply dismiss him with a reprimand, force him to run extra drills, perhaps reduce his squad ranking. That would have been a win. But then Vergax stepped closer. "Adaptation," the general said slowly, tasting the word like a foreign toxin. "That is the human excuse for recklessness." And then he struck. The slap was sudden, brutal, and deliberate. His upper right hand moved with predatory precision, slamming across Eli's face with a force meant not to injure, but to humiliate. A gesture more cultural than corporal, laden with historical weight, a public reminder of who held authority. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Eli staggered but did not fall. A sharp buzz rang in his ears, and a thin line of blood traced down his cheekbone. He brought a hand to it, more in acknowledgement than pain. His eyes found the general's, steady, unfazed. Silence blanketed the chamber. Among most galactic species, that slap would have been the end of it. The final word. A dominance ritual etched into military tradition for centuries. No one disobeyed after a slap. No one dared to stand taller afterward. 3 seconds passed. Eli didn't bow. Didn't apologize. Instead, he squared his stance. Not aggressive, not submissive, balanced. He wiped the blood from his cheek with the back of his hand and let it smear faintly across his uniform. Vergax's eyes narrowed. There was something alien to him now in the human's calm. Not just insolence. Not even defiance. It was something deeper. Something that whispered of wars fought. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. General Vergax remained frozen in the posture of a strike, arms still partially extended, expecting the human to crumple. Eli Rourke remained upright, silent, and entirely still, save for the faint twitch of his jaw. The silence deepened, dense enough to crush oxygen from the room. Then Eli stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't posture. His left foot shifted slightly, his knees bent, not as a challenge but in preparation. Those who had spent time with humans might have recognized the shift in stance, but most present had no idea what was coming. Vergax blinked. It was all the time Eli needed. In one fluid movement, Eli surged forward, avoiding the towering general's reach and slipping inside his guard. His hand moved like lightning, 2 fingers and a thumb jabbing directly into the hollow just beneath the general's third rib, the location of a cluster of neural filaments known to coalition medics, but rarely exposed in combat. Vergax let out a strangled snarl. Eli's next motion was surgical. He twisted his fingers, applying direct pressure and torque. The effect was immediate. The general's legs buckled, and his upper arms flailed involuntarily. One knee crashed to the floor, then the other, metal grating beneath his weight. His massive body convulsed once before he collapsed fully, gasping, claws scraping against the floor in a desperate, scrambling bid to remain upright. Shocked murmurs rippled through the cadets. Someone choked back a gasp. A Noxari lieutenant reached for their communicator but hesitated. Vergax writhed, every attempt to rise thwarted by the nerve-induced paralysis overtaking his limbs. His breath rasped through his jaws, and for the first time, the decorated general, veteran of 7 frontier wars, slayer of tyrants, looked afraid. Eli stepped back. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He hadn't shouted. His uniform wasn't even torn. But the balance of power in that chamber had shifted so profoundly it felt as though the artificial gravity had flickered. "Pressure point," Eli said, calmly, almost like a lesson. "Every species has them. You just have to know where to look." Vergax hissed through clenched teeth. "You dare. After you struck me in violation of the Coalition Code of Conduct, Section 12, Subsection 8? Eli tilted his head slightly. "Yes, I do." The silence that followed was no longer stunned. It was reverent. Cadets, once stoic in their ranks, now looked between each other in disbelief. This wasn't merely resistance. It was mastery, precision, control. And unlike Vergax's display, it was entirely devoid of ego. "Medical drones are inbound," someone announced at last, voice taut. Eli took another step back, giving the general space as the first spherical drone buzzed into the bay, scanning and deploying mild sedatives. A second drone floated closer to Eli, but didn't administer treatment, his vitals red as calm, unharmed save for the small cut on his cheek. Vergax tried to speak, but his mouth slurred through the partial paralysis. His command presence, once absolute, now hung around him in shreds. Eli turned to the rest of the cadets, addressing not just his squad, but the entire formation. "I didn't come here to fight," he said, his voice measured. "Humans were invited into the coalition to learn, to serve, to adapt." He let the words hang, his gaze sweeping over rows of bewildered faces. "But Earth isn't a quiet world. We weren't shaped by certainty or safety. We were forged by catastrophe. We survived by learning fast, adapting faster. And when someone hits us, we don't bow. We calculate." One of the younger cadets, Avri, a feathery, owl-eyed Tarshin, raised a hand slowly. "You didn't even look angry." "I wasn't," Eli replied. "Anger's a reaction. I chose action." Another ripple of murmurs followed. The drones lifted Vergax onto a gurney. He was conscious, but silent now, eyes locked on Eli with a blend of fury and something colder, respect, or perhaps fear. He'd been defeated in the one arena he believed himself untouchable. And he knew that in the eyes of the Academy, that defeat would echo longer than any scar. Eli took a deep breath. His hand still tingled from the strike he'd endured earlier, but he didn't reach up to touch his cheek. That pain was already receding, filed away. He returned to his position in the line. Not a single cadet moved to stop him. No one mocked. No one whispered insults. Even the Noxari soldiers in the formation said nothing, their expressions unreadable, but no longer contemptuous. The ranking officer on site, a pale blue courtier named Seelan, approached the podium with deliberate steps. Her voice, crisp and unshaken, addressed the assembly. This event is under review by the Ethics and Conduct Tribunal. Until a formal ruling is delivered, all involved parties will be restricted to non-combat instruction and observation drills only. Her eyes flicked toward Eli, not accusing, but curious. She didn't order his detainment. As the cadets were dismissed, they filed out in staggered silence. A few cast backward glances at Eli. Some with awe, others with calculation. Word would spread quickly. Not just of a human fighting back, but of how he did it, calmly, precisely, without breaking protocol. And how the general, for all his fury, had begged for mercy within moments. Eli stayed behind until the last of them had gone. The scent of ozone still lingered in the bay. He didn't feel victorious. He felt watched. And he was. High above, in the command gallery's tinted glass, unseen eyes marked the change. Not just in Eli Rourke, but in the perception of his kind. The slap had been meant to silence. Instead, it had started a conversation that no one could ignore. Eli stood motionless as the doors to the assembly bay sealed behind the last cadet. The chamber was empty now, save for the faint hum of inactive drones and the slow, pulsing lights that marked the edge of the floor. The silence no longer felt oppressive, it felt earned. The tribunal convened within a day. Coalition justice was not swift by nature, but the political gravity of the incident had compressed timelines. A human cadet rendering a decorated Noxari general incapacitated in front of multi-species witnesses was not something that could be buried under routine process. It had already sparked conversation across 3 command sectors and 17 diplomatic channels. Words like disciplinary misconduct, cultural violation, and diplomatic liability circled like carrion birds, but none carried enough weight to land. Eli wasn't summoned until the second morning. When he entered the tribunal chamber, the panel was already seated, 7 members representing 5 species, each with an expression carefully neutral. They didn't ask him to explain his actions immediately. Instead, they asked what he had intended to teach by doing nothing after the slap. I wanted him to understand he hadn't won yet, Eli answered. The panel conferred quietly, then asked why he'd used a known nerve cluster, a technique that, in some systems, could be considered equivalent to use of lethal force. I used the minimum necessary to end the conflict, he said. I did not strike with anger. I applied training. They nodded, taking notes in their curved scripts and light projections. They asked if he regretted anything. Yes, he replied after a pause. I regret that it had to happen in the first place. They did not discipline him. The tribunal issued a private censure to General Vergax and a public statement classifying the incident as a cross-cultural disciplinary breakdown with extraordinary mitigating circumstances. Eli was restricted from command simulations for 3 weeks, a penalty so light it might as well have been ceremonial. The message had been clear: restraint is power, and power, when wielded with purpose, commands its own gravity. Vergax was not seen again. Rumor held that he'd requested reassignment to the outer colonies under the guise of medical recovery. Officially, he was still on rotation. Unofficially, his name stopped appearing on daily schedules. Whatever pride he'd once held in his role had dissolved beneath the weight of a single, precise moment, one he could neither undo nor explain away. Eli returned to the barracks to find that everything had changed. It wasn't overt. No one saluted him. No one lined up to shake his hand. But conversations quieted when he passed, and then resumed in unfamiliar tones, ones tinged with interest instead of dismissal. A few cadets from species known for their tactical prowess sought him out under the guise of casual interaction. Avri, the owl-eyed cadet who had questioned him during the aftermath, asked if he could observe a human combat routine. Others followed. Within days, a small group had formed, unofficial, unsanctioned, but consistent. Eli taught quietly in the cargo bays after lights out. Not just techniques, but principles: fluidity, leverage, psychological deterrence. He never bragged. He never mentioned Vergax. It didn't matter. They remembered. He earned a name, passed between cadets like a low whisper, the quiet storm. It wasn't meant as flattery. It was a warning: passed with equal parts respect and caution. Not everyone celebrated. Some, particularly those still loyal to the old hierarchies, watched him with narrow-eyed scrutiny. They saw a disruption to the order, a shift in the gravitational pull of the Academy's power structure. But even they could not deny what had happened, nor the truth it exposed. Humans were not to be pitted or tolerated. They were to be measured. 3 weeks after the tribunal, Eli was called to the command level. He expected a reprimand, perhaps a transfer. Instead, he was met by Commander Seelan, the Quarterty officer who had witnessed the incident. She offered no small talk. Only a datapad. "You've been requested," she said. "By who?" "A coalition special training unit. They want you to consult on cross-species combat adaptability." Eli didn't reach for the pad immediately. "Is this a reward?" Seelan shook her head. "It's recognition." He accepted the transfer. As he packed his belongings, he paused at the foot of his bunk. The Academy had tested him, pushed him to the edge of submission, and waited to see which way he would fall. He hadn't broken. He hadn't exploded. He had adapted, just as humanity always had. The incident had started as a lesson in dominance. It ended as a demonstration in control. As the transport lifted from the docking ring, Eli looked once more at the crescent shape of the Academy beneath him. Somewhere inside it, another cadet would step out of line. Another species would test the limits of how far tradition could stretch before it snapped. But now they would all think twice. Because a general had slapped a human. And 3 seconds later, he had begged for mercy. The transport touched down on the surface of Station Raxus, a classified coalition outpost buried in the magnetic shadows of a collapsed star. Unlike the Academy, there was no ceremonial structure here, no parade drills or gleaming banners. Just cold alloy floors, thick radiation shielding, and officers who didn't care where you came from, only whether you survived the trial you were assigned. Eli Rourke stepped off the ramp and into a corridor lit in dim blues, the walls humming faintly with stabilizer pulses. A figure waited at the end, lean, tall, wrapped in a modular armor frame that adapted subtly as she moved. Her skin was translucent ivory, veins glowing faintly beneath, and her eyes shimmered like ice held against sunlight. Threxan, most likely. Or, at least part. She didn't extend a hand. Just nodded. "You're late by 14 minutes. Didn't know I was expected that precisely." "You are now," she replied. "Come." She turned and walked, boots silent. Eli followed, passing rooms filled with gravity-inverted sparring zones, chemical immersion tanks, language neuralizers. Everything about the station radiated a single truth. This place wasn't for ceremony. It was for shaping those who would act when negotiation failed. She stopped at a sealed door. "Rourke," she said, facing him again, "this station exists for one reason: preparation. The Coalition learned, painfully, that treaties break faster than armor plates. So they formed Division 9, Advanced Recon, Extraction, First Contact Enforcement, Rogue Suppression." Eli didn't flinch. "Sounds surgical." "It is." She looked him over. "They requested you because of your file, your performance, and the incident." He said nothing. "You're not here because you're human," she added. "You're here because you chose your moment. Others lash out. You calculated." The door opened, revealing a chamber lined with armored observers and a single pit at its center. In it stood a creature that barely resembled anything he'd trained against, taller than Vergax, broader, with triple-jointed limbs and armor fused to its carapace. Not a simulation. A prisoner. Eli stepped closer to the edge. "Live." "Yes." Rogue synthetic from the Nemerin break. Took down an entire freighter crew during a routine boarding inspection. Minimal weapon systems. Maximum aggression. He studied it. "You're not testing it. You're testing me." "Correct." "You enter in 30 seconds. No weapons. Neutralize and extract targeting data from its spinal node." The pit door opened. Eli didn't argue. He stepped in. The floor sealed behind him with a hydraulic hiss, leaving him face to face with the beast. It hadn't moved, but he could feel it assessing him, not just visually but audibly, thermally. It pulsed a low sound like sonar. Not a challenge. A reading. Then it lunged. Eli didn't dodge. He stepped into its strike zone again, same as he had with Vergax, lowered his stance and pivoted, using the thing's own momentum to bring it halfway around. It recovered mid-fall, landed on all 6 limbs, and launched a spinning counterstrike that tore a chunk from the wall. Asterisk fast. Not mindless. Asterisk. Eli narrowed his eyes and shifted tactics. He didn't go for brute strength. He used environment, distance, misdirection. He led the creature into a corner, baited it with false rhythm, then slammed his elbow into a joint seam at the back of its leg. It buckled, screeched, then turned with a motion so fast it nearly blurred. It stabbed at his side, not with blades but with pressurized force. Pain exploded through Eli's ribs. But he didn't stop. He ducked under the follow-up, twisted, and drove his fingers into the neck seam at the base of the armor. The plating resisted, but the flesh beneath responded.
1, 2,
3. The creature seized. Its body locked, shuddered, then collapsed. Eli staggered back, panting, blood soaking the side of his uniform. He retrieved the targeting node from the back of its neck and turned to the door. It opened before he could speak. The Threxan stood in the threshold. Time, 74 seconds. Damage sustained. 2 fractured ribs. Emotional state, steady. Impressive. I'm bleeding, he muttered. You're not dead. Yet. Drink this. She handed him a small vial that burned like fire as he swallowed it. Almost instantly, the pain dulled. The bleeding slowed. She walked with him back to the corridor. No applause. No commendation. Only function. You pass. That's simple?
no.
But simplicity isn't the enemy. Complexity is. She paused. The way you fight, it's not about winning. It's about ending. Eli nodded once. He didn't need her approval. But her understanding. That asterisk mattered. They reached a lift. Welcome to Division 9, she said. We don't salute here. We don't decorate. But we don't forget. As the doors closed, Eli allowed himself a small exhale. Not of relief. Of certainty. This wasn't the end of his journey. It wasn't even the peak. It was the moment the galaxy would remember, when they first understood. Slapping a human wasn't dominance. It was a countdown. 3 weeks into Division 9, Eli learned there were no rest days. There were rest intervals, scheduled hours where your body could recover if it hadn't already adapted past the point of needing rest. But relaxation, comfort, familiarity, those concepts didn't exist on Station Raxus. The walls remained the same colorless alloy, the lighting never brightened past practical levels, and the only indicator of time was the silence between drills. He thrived in it. Division 9 didn't operate like the Academy. There were no ranks spoken aloud, no salutes exchanged. The hierarchy was defined entirely by performance. You were either useful or you were a liability. Those who proved useful were given access. Knowledge. Missions. Eli earned his first within 10 days. The team assigned was 4 strong. 2 operatives he'd trained beside, Rylax, a lizard-skin tactician with a voice like static, and Vrainy, a mute but expressive telepathic node-bearer from the Kartha strain. The 4th was their field lead, Dallin Varys, human like Eli, but harder, with the kind of stare that implied he'd buried more secrets than friends. They were dropped without warning onto an abandoned mining rig orbiting Draxir 7. The objective was simple: recover encrypted logs from a vanished Coalition scout team. No signs of conflict. No distress signals. Just silence. Eli moved through the derelict corridors with a weapon he hadn't been given at the Academy, a variable resonance baton tuned to disable non-biological threats. Not that he expected machines. The silence of the rig wasn't mechanical. It was hollow. Movement in Vent Sector 3, Rylax whispered through comms. Could be residual heat. Could be bait, Dallin replied. They split. Eli took the lower maintenance tunnel alone. He didn't question it. Division 9 didn't coddle its members. You were trusted or dismissed. He crawled through the tight space, his breath steady, listening for more than just footsteps. The rig's air recycling system had long since died. Every movement echoed like a whisper shouted down a canyon. Then he found them. The scout team hadn't disappeared. They'd been stored. Bodies floated in a sealed cargo bay, suspended in low-grav stasis fields, each one marked with a neural drain port. Not dead. Not quite. Their brainwaves pulsed in erratic bursts, readable, extractable. Eli triggered his comm, found the team. They're alive, but drained. By what? Rylax asked. Before he could answer, the lights snapped off. In the dark, Eli moved low. He didn't panic. He counted steps, recalled the bay layout. Behind him, something stirred. Not metal, not footsteps. Breathing. A hand reached from the dark, bone-thin. Too many joints. He ducked, rolled, baton igniting in a snap of light. It revealed a figure not catalogued in any coalition database. Humanoid, but stretched, elongated. Eyes black and wide, too wide. Not synthetic. Not fully biological either. It lunged again. Eli struck first. The baton cracked across its arm. It shrieked, not in pain but in distortion, like a frequency breaking open. It vanished back into the dark, but the pressure remained. Unknown hostile, Eli hissed. Organic synthetic hybrid. Aggression confirmed. Fall back, Dallin ordered. We exfil together. Eli didn't argue. He memorized the stasis field's control panel, tagged it for remote retrieval, and sprinted through the bay doors just as they slammed shut behind him. The hiss of sealing hydraulics echoed like the gasp of something furious at losing prey. They regrouped at the evac point, breathless, bruised, but intact. The retrieval beacon for the scout team activated. No one spoke until they were safely back aboard Raxus. In debrief, the analysts asked Eli what he saw. He gave them details. Anatomy, movement, vocal range. But the part he didn't say out loud, the part still rattling at the edges of his mind, was the moment the thing had looked at him. Not with hunger, with recognition. It had known him. Back in his quarters, Eli sat in the dark, replaying the encounter. Not to relive the fear, there hadn't been any, but to isolate the anomaly. The creature had seen him and paused. Not out of confusion, out of calculation. As if it, too, had heard what happened in the academy. As if the myth of the cadet who made a general beg had reached further than command suspected. And that thought didn't make him feel proud. It made him feel watched. Division 9 didn't brief him on the origin of the creature. They didn't warn him if more were coming. They just reassigned him, twice in the next 6 days. Each mission tougher, the enemies less defined, the threats more abstract. Psychological operations. Subspace anomalies. Preemptive hostage extractions. Eli didn't falter. But each mission confirmed what he'd already suspected. He hadn't been brought to Division 9 to be shaped. He'd been brought because something out there already knew what he was becoming. And it had started paying attention.